Welcome to PXE International's January webinar, PXE Research Update with Patrick Terry. Speaking to us, I'm Christine Vogie, Director of Education and Information at PXE International. Again, for those of you who just joined, there's a question panel on the right side of your screen within the question pane within the control panel. And if you expand that out, you can type any questions in you have about the content of the webinar. And any technical issues you might have if you're having trouble seeing or hearing the webinar, and we'll try to get back to you about those. The answers will come back in the question panel. So we're ready to begin, and I am very pleased to welcome Patrick Terry, who is a co-founder and chairman of the board of PXE International. He's also father of 2 young adults with PXE. And he has done everything in this organization. He's worked on basic lab research. He's worked on clinical translational studies for PXE. And he also works to support and move forward the whole PXE research agenda. Pat, welcome to the webinar today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Christine. Hopefully everyone can hear me just fine. And I'm glad we have a bunch of people on. So what I'll do is introduce a little bit about PXE research, what we know, what we think we know, and where we're going in the research agenda for the foundation. So I'll start the presentation, and so what I'll do today is I'll talk for just a portion of our time and try to leave as much time as I can to get through these slides and allow you to ask questions, and Chris will get back on and organize questions. So again, in your control panel, there's a little area called chat or questions that you can type in and hit the send button. And I'll get those questions and I can respond to those. So please ask questions. The old saying, the only dumb question is the one you didn't ask. So please ask whatever questions you have. The only caveat or warning here is I'm not a physician. I'm not a PhD scientist, so I can't offer any direct medical advice or individual advice. And I'm just a dad, and I got involved with PXE research a little over 15 years ago because of our 2 children that were diagnosed. So what I'll share with you with the foundation's research activity and what we're doing with literally hundreds of research and clinicians around the world to advance the understanding of pseudoxanthoma elasticum. So today in my presentation I'll outline just an overview of what the research plan was, give you an update, some bulleted updates around the research summary. I'll share with you what we think we know to date and where that's going, and information being built around the animal models. And there's a number of experimental research tools that are being used on various animal models to understand pseudoxanthoma elasticum. I'll also quickly run through all of the research activities that are taking place, and I'll certainly highlight the areas where we're progressing forward with research and moving the intervention and the clinical trial program forward to try to produce some solutions for PXE. So the foundation, what we mean by research support, we provide funds for researchers. We support publications of scientific and medical knowledge. We can take advantage of an opportunity to provide technical assistance and equipment to research groups around the world. Certainly with advanced informatics and computer technology, we've been also able to advance a lot of bioinformatics and health technology solutions to research groups, and we also support training and staffing and what's called consumables, which are just basically the kind of the picks and the shovels and the chemicals used for research. We also support and provide some of those materials to groups around the world. So it's It is everything from basic equipment to supplies to research assistance to the knowledge share, but basically this is how PXE International got started in its research enterprise, and certainly has gotten much more sophisticated since our early days, and you'll see about that. So a few days after my two children were diagnosed, I was working in the Boston, Massachusetts area. I was a construction manager for a large construction firm that was kind of actively building the biotechnology and healthcare and hospitals of Boston and Cambridge through the 80s and 90s. So being a project engineer, I decided, well, why don't we come up with a project plan from, let's see if we could discover what's the basic genetics of PXE, and could we get all the way to the other side of this chart and get to an intervention or interfere with the disease process. And all these little boxes represent a different type of research activity or a sequence of activities that advance us towards this knowledge base that hopefully we could understand the disease and the pathway and come up with a rational design to stave off the most severe consequences of the disorder. This is basically a naive diagram done 15 years ago, and a few years into the foundation, I think about after 6 years, we had almost all of these boxes. There were research activities taking place, and certainly today we've quickly eclipsed this diagram and are in much more detailed research activities. But basically this block diagram is showing, we believed in the early days that PXE is a genetic disease, and there's mutations that in a gene that cause some of the disease manifestations, and we thought we could build a diagnostic to understand and characterize patients better. This gene codes for a protein that has a certain function. The human disease manifests in a certain way. The disease progresses in a certain way. So we thought that epidemiological research was really important, and sometimes that's called natural history studies to understand what happens over time with various individuals with this disease. We thought that certain changes in the gene would result in certain manifestations of the disease, which I'll certainly talk more about. And we thought that various aspects of genetics and analysis of the gene and analysis of our genome and analysis of the protein was going to be important. We thought early on that certainly an animal model would be very important for the understanding of the disease, and one of the first research projects PXE International ever financed in the first year of our existence was some animal studies in Jackson Laboratories up in Maine. We thought that in vitro systems or cellular modeling was going to be an important research activity. Certainly what are called in vivo studies, which means studies in the body, studies with interventions, studies with various treatments were going to be informative, so we could understand what would be the most advantageous way to help individuals with this disease. We thought experimental assays would help us develop drugs for this disorder, and we could come up with a concept in that big red box near the end that we could come up with a rational intervention design. And you'll see from this presentation how all of those things have kind of happened since then. So it was, this is a simple diagram, and all of these arrows mean that there's information passing back and forth, and it was certainly our objective when we founded PXE International is to do all these activities and make sure information flowed back and forth between individual researchers doing activities in these areas, as well as publications and data and research tools and research materials being shared across all of these disciplines to help us move quickly. So I'll have 3 slides here that just I'll highlight bullets about kind of slide update 1, 2, and 3. So the first slide, it's exciting for us certainly because there were just this past year and a half there were 2 new PhDs awarded for PXE research. So these are very bright students and fellows that have gone on now to do work in PXE and publish a thesis in PXE, a young woman in Germany, a young man in Belgium, that have substantially dedicated their career to PXE research. So that was really exciting to see young, bright, independent individuals getting involved with their own initiative in PXE because of real interest on their behalf. So that they're both doing very exciting research and work, and it's been a joy to interact with them both. Certainly, as many of you know, after the gene was discovered, which I'll talk more about, but the liver has become an object of extreme interest for PXE. The gene itself, called ABCC6, which I'll talk more about what that means, but that's just a nomenclature or a designation for the disease gene that encodes for a certain protein that's expressed primarily in the liver and kidney, which was a surprise. After the gene was found, no one thought that that this disease was associated with the liver and kidney, but I'll talk more about why that is. What's known and what's been researched over the last few years is, where is this protein located? How does it potentially function in the liver organ itself? Where is it, located in the liver? So what's called the basal lateral hepatocyte. So hepatocytes are liver cells, and the basal lateral layer is where this protein positions itself and functions. And there was some recent movies that were cellular movies that were done, and I had hoped to include them in this presentation, but I couldn't get them in time. But literally does show how this protein operates in the cell, where does it localize, and through a variety of staining mechanisms, researchers have actually been able to take active live movies of hepatocytes and how this protein actually moves in the cell and localizes and how it functions. So it's been pretty astounding where technology has come. There is also known that it's not just the liver and kidney, that peripheral tissue environment and the extracellular environment within our organs and our body itself have a major impact on the disease activity and the disease manifestations, and most of this type of work has been coming out of the research group of Yvonne Ronchetti in Italy, and she's done some foundational work in understanding the activities of PXE cells around the body, or PXE's influence on cells around the body. The hypothesis now, which I'll talk more about in other slides, is that there's something missing in the circulatory system. So circulating in the blood system of PXE patients, there is something that shouldn't be there, or there's something that is missing, that causes all of the consequences of PXE. So fundamentally what we're looking at with anybody that has papule lesions on their neck, or cardiovascular difficulties, ocular lesions, all of that is secondary consequences to the primary cause of the disease, which is probably something that's associated with metabolism. And I'll talk more about what that is. But that all falls under what's known and what's being researched in the liver. The genetics have advanced pretty extensively over the last few years, and obviously because of our research agenda, that was pretty much where we started 15 years ago, so there's been a lot of time and a lot of activity. It's been described now and understood that PXE is a recessive disease, meaning that you need to get 2 altered copies of the PXE gene to have PXE. So an individual would have to receive an altered gene from their mother, an altered gene from their father, basically have no functioning PXE gene as a result, and have PXE. Genotype means gene or genetic characterization of the gene, and there's There's now been over 300 distinct or individual alterations and thousands of mutations that have been described now and published in the literature and are on centralized website. There's been a lot of other research done on similar genes that have PXE-like symptoms or phenotypes. And then there's also some research on families that have severe disease and understanding that they have alterations in other genes that exacerbate or make their PXE symptoms worse. So there's been an extensive amount of research and publications. In slide 2, there's a variety of animal models, and that's what I had highlighted before, how important in animal models. So there's a zebrafish, which is a tiny little minnow-like fish, and the advantage of those fish is that they are transparent. Their eggs are transparent, and even adults are transparent, so they're translucent. You can see right through them. They grow very rapidly, and there's ongoing work in understanding PXE's influence on zebrafish. There's a number of animal models, mouse models, and these mice have been designed to have PXE. So the gene ABCC6 that exists in the mouse has been knocked out. So these mice have pseudoxanthoma elasticum. And these mice have been very important experimental systems because not only do these mouse develop PXE just like humans do, but they provide all kinds of opportunities to do various experiments on skin grafts and taking PXE skin and grafting them onto a wild type or a healthy mouse and seeing that the skin can reverse itself, the mineralization of that skin can reverse. So it provides indications that there are opportunities to reverse, not only stall the disease process, but to even reverse some of the consequences. There's been a lot of discussion about various vitamin K treatments, and I'll talk more about vitamin K and the controversy associated with the vitamin K. There's been a lot of attempts to understand the minerals and the balance that is associated with phosphorus and magnesium and calcium in vitamin K with these animal models, and certainly working hard to understand what is this enzyme or this molecule that's involved with PXE and what can the mouse models tell us. There's lots of work that's taking place in treating the animals with various diets, various interventions, various stress environments to see if there are any ways to understand and prevent some of the consequences of PXE, and certainly a lot of vitamin K experiments and magnesium studies have been done on the animals, and that work is ongoing, which I'll talk more about. The current investigations on slide 3 here, update 3, is about the vitamin K investigations. There are numbers of groups around the world that are working on this, and currently the work has been inconclusive, unreplicated, and incomplete. So we're really pushing hard on the research community to complete some of these studies. There's been lots of negative data, meaning that vitamin K does not seem to be associated with PXE, and vitamin K is a very complex. There's multiple conjugates or forms of vitamin K, and all of these things have been tried in experimental cellular systems and animal models, and there seems to be no real evidence that vitamin K is involved with PXE, so that's somewhat disappointing, but we really can't come to that conclusion yet because the research is still ongoing, and I'll talk about the research meeting and some of the consequences of that. There's certainly a high degree of interest associated with magnesium, and there's a number of groups investigating magnesium and its influence on the animal models. There's a proposed investigational human clinical trial that will be launched this year associated with magnesium, and the FDA is reviewing that protocol. The Food and Drug Administration in the United States is reviewing that protocol to give it a clearance, so this trial could move forward with a small cohort of patients. PXE International has sponsored and financed a number of research meetings over the last year. There's been meetings in Budapest in Austria, here in the United States in Frederick, Maryland, and Bethesda, Maryland. And the November meeting was a large international consensus conference in PXE, and this happens every few years to review all of the scientific and clinical progress and come to conclusions and come to a consensus about what are the research activities that need to move forward. And this was a very effective meeting. It's quite astounding. It's probably one of the most cohesive and directed research meetings that we've been involved with, and the research collaborations coming out of that meeting were fabulous. So there's groups that PXE International has worked with independently for a number of years are now agreeing to work much more closely together and collaborate and get to some real stellar findings about what's happening, what the potential intervention is. So that was an exciting series of outcomes. So the investigational clinical trial, there's probably 2 of them that will come out of this research meeting that will be launched this year, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. What we know that PXE is a genetic disorder. It's a systemic disease. The liver and kidney are involved in a fundamental way, and the consequences of what's happening in the liver and kidney are not happening in the liver and kidney affects the elastin and collagen fibers within the body and the skin and the eyes and the arteries and the gastrointestinal system. So all of what we describe as having the symptoms of PXE are kind of a secondary event, or not that they're just examples of something that's happening in the circulatory or metabolic system that's causing the disease. And the prevalence is about 1 in 50,000. Certainly there are much larger concentrations or founder populations around the world. It affects every ethnic and racial group around the world. Manifestations are more pronounced in women, and the reasons for that are not quite known, but certainly it's believed that hormones seem to accelerate or cause more severe disease, and meaning women are potentially much more severely affected than men. As I mentioned before, the inheritance is autosomal recessive, and there's been no cases that have been documented and confirmed of dominance. So even the old literature reports different forms of PXE, recessive and dominance, but our work in the genetic research has put that to bed, that there really is only autosomal recessive transference of this disease. And multiple generations within a family is what's called pseudodominance, meaning that there's individuals in the family or people that marry in that are actually carriers, meaning that they have one good copy of ABCC6 and they have one altered copy, so they're just carriers of the disease, and the carrier status is probably quite high in the general population. So that's how these sporadic PXE events occur, or why a family sometimes looks like they have dominant PXE. The gene itself, this is just a diagram of kind of a complex picture of the entire gene, and all of these little arrows and numbers indicate specific mutations and alterations in this gene. And at the bottom there's a series of black lines that are just a nomenclature to show that there's large sections of the gene in some individuals that have been deleted, and they have a loss of function because there's a large section or a small but important section of the gene that has been altered or deleted. This is a cartoon of the protein itself, and this is a picture of all of the individual amino acids. So these arrows and nomenclature point to amino acid changes in the gene in various locations that affect the activity of this protein. So not only are there alterations of the gene, but subsequently alterations in the protein. In the clinical side of things, the disorder is described as a late onset or slow progressing disease. There's lots of intra and interfamilial heterogeneity, which just means it's highly variable, even within families. even though you have two brothers that have the same alterations in the PXE gene, they both can have quite different phenotype or characteristic disease manifestations, and the reasons for that are really complex, and there's lots of causes to that variability, but the direct correlation between environment or other genetic factors are still not well described and currently are unknown. We've done a lot of work to try to see if there's a genotype-phenotype correlation, meaning if you have a certain alteration in this protein, I'll just step back a slide. So if two individuals have the exact same alteration to the protein, do they have the exact type of disease? Do they have similar progression, similar manifestations, similar complications? And it's been somewhat disappointing, but no, there is no correlation. So there's a much more complex conditions going on than the genotype and the clinical manifestations in individuals. So it's not going to be so easy to be able to describe, well, you have this type of, let's run a diagnostic test and say that you have this alteration. That means you're going to have severe ocular difficulties at your fifth or sixth decade of life. That's what we had hoped we could be able to tell patients, but this data is not that predictive. So it's much more complex than that, and there's probably other what are called modifier genes. So this last bullet meaning that there's probably other genes that have an impact on PXE, and also there's probably other things that we have not really investigated quite as rigorously yet. So there's areas of the gene called the promoter region, or there's control mechanisms, these things called non-coding functional elements. So there's literally sections of our genome that control gene expression or control particular gene function in various tissue types that probably have an influence on gene expression and the disease itself. So there's still a lot of, even though we've been doing genetics work for over a decade, there's probably still an extensive amount of basic genetic and genomic work that needs to be done to understand all of these complexities associated with PXE. So we talked about the gene and the protein, and ABC stands for ATP binding cassette. So this is just scientific language and to describe these transporters. This is a very large family of ancient genes and proteins that exist in all lower animal forms, all the way to humans. They're fundamental to the functioning of life on this planet. And basically what these things are these proteins create channels or conduits between cells, among cells, in complex membranes that allow things to be transported from one side of the cell to the other, or an active transport, or in a tube in which certain proteins can pass through to allow themselves to function and assemble in certain ways. So these are important genes for all kinds of human diseases. And basically ATP is a chemical that allows, it's like gasoline, if you will, that allows this pumping mechanism or these two pistons to operate. So the protein actually is what's called a efflux transporter. So it means it's moving things from one side of the membrane to the other in a pumping mechanism. And sometimes PXE alterations interfere with these two pumps, and this protein doesn't function in the way that it should. Here's a cartoon that was done way back that I did when the gene was discovered and initially described by a number of groups back in 1999 and 2000. And this is just a cutaway or a cartoon of the plasma membrane, and this pink or purple squiggly detail is the protein itself, and this is how it assembles in the membrane. And there's a protein molecule inside the cytoplasm or inside the cell that gets pumped out from the inside to the outside to the extracellular space. So this is the scenario in which everyone believes that this protein is functioning is ABC6 or MRP6. And there's 48 of these types of proteins. And as I said, these are literally hundreds, if not billions of years old of evolution adapting and using various forms of this protein for certain functions. In that square box off on the left, you can see MRP6 or ABCC6. So that's the gene associated with PXE. We've done research activities and support research activities on 16 of these proteins. So even now, some of these other proteins are not associated with PXE. There are some advantages of working with certain proteins because they're associated with other diseases and other research groups, and certainly to understand an individual, you can get a huge advantage by understanding the community in which that protein has come from, and how does it function in bacteria, how does this protein function in plants, how does it function in zebrafish and mice. So this is all a part of an evolutionary biology or an evolutionary genetics to understand the functioning of this protein. These transporters have been associated with all kinds of diseases. Certainly a lot of people have heard about age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. Cystic fibrosis is another well-known disorder that's part of these proteins. So there's a whole list of these various transporters that, when they're not functioning correctly, result in human disease of various sorts. So our research results since we founded the organization is we've discovered the gene, we've created this mutational informational database, we've created this biorepository of samples and clinical data, the patient registry, the genotype-phenotype program, which I talked about. And even though we didn't find a genotype-phenotype correlation, we're finding clustering that perhaps we can describe certain types of PXE from this genotype data that fall into subfamilies or subclusters that we're still working on, and certainly would love to be able to have a highly precise diagnostic test that told an individual really what type of form they would have, what type of aggressive strategy should be considered by a physician to manage the disease and mitigate its complications. We've done a series of patenting and licensing in this area. We've provided clinical diagnostics to the community. We have these animal models. We're creating now what are called functional screening assays. And we are embarking on a biomarker program that will support a drug discovery effort that we'll be launching this year. There's these 2 human clinical studies that will most likely be launched this year as well, and certainly progressing towards some treatment development for perhaps just the symptoms of PXE, but certainly we're hoping to understand and how to manage this disease and see if we can interfere with the disease process. So what do we think we know? So this is all conjecture, but there's some early evidence that shows that the absence of this gene or protein in the liver leads to an alteration of or a loss of a factor that should be circulating in the bloodstream that prevents mineralization of the soft tissues in the body. So if PXE is a mineralization of collagen, elastin in the body, then there's some enzyme or compound that prevents or repairs that damage. And what's happening in PXE that this enzyme or this factor is lost, and then you get mineralization of these fibers. So the serum or sera of PXE patients can be, or the sera of affected mouse, lack of capacity to prevent mineralization. So we're certainly very interested in finding out what this is to solve the PXE dilemma, but certainly if you can understand a way to reverse mineralization of soft tissues, which is fundamentally the normal aging process, then this would be very interesting certainly to others. Just understand skin wrinkling or cardiovascular disease and mineralization of peripheral vascular tissues and so forth, so it will certainly have phenomenal impact on other diseases and other conditions, and certainly most everybody on the planet will want to know how to stave off mineralization. The cell hypothesis is also believe that this is not just metabolic disease, that there are other things that are involved locally in the skin and in the liver and in various cells of the body that are important, that the experiments on fibroblasts or skin cells have demonstrated that there is environmental factors in which these cells are not functioning properly that it's associated with PXEs. So the mitochondria, which are kind of the fuel cell within the body, do not function properly. So there's this feedback loop when this ABC6 is not functioning properly in the cellular membrane of hepatocytes. It affects cells throughout the body as well. So there's quite a complex cascade of interactions, and it's not just quite as simple as saying this is a metabolic disorder, that there's also cells that are involved here in this complex interaction and relationship that still need to be figured out. So the predominant agreement among the research community is PXE is a metabolic disorder caused by the absence or imbalance of an anti-mineralization factor or factors that's associated with the regulatory process within tissues, within organs, within cells, and the animal models and what's called conjoining experiments seem to support this idea. So there's been an experiment where you take a mouse that has PXE, so it has 2 altered copies of the gene, and you take a non-affected mouse and you literally sew them together so that the mouse are like Siamese twins, that they end up sharing circulatory systems, everything about their circulatory systems is shared, and you can see that some of the disease manifestations in the affected mouse get alleviated by having the circulatory support of the unaffected mouse. So again, there's another dramatic example of how the circulating or metabolic factor has an impact on PXE. So that's an example of some experimental animal models that support this metabolic syndrome idea. So as we know, this is a graphic cartoon of, the liver is a very large organ, an important organ, and has lots of functions. It's a very complex organ. The liver itself has a very complex exchange and its own circulatory system. So how PXE, how MRP6 operates in the hepatocytes and operates and interacts with this circulatory and exchange system of the liver still is being worked on to really understand not only the metabolic conditions of PXE, but even the tissue-based function of ABCC6 and how it relates to this exchange of fluids and within the liver itself. So there's lots of nuances and experimental work going on to understand not only a complex disease, but a complex protein and a complex organ system. But nonetheless, all of what we describe as PXE, with the eye lesions and the cardiac and the gastrointestinal challenges and the peripheral vascular disease and the skin changes and the fundamental changes to the elastin recoil and elasticity of collagen and elastin can all be described now as secondary events to the true primary cause or pathogenesis of PXE. So we're still left with some big questions about how do mutations in this gene express in the liver and cause the disease? How is this associated with a circulatory system? And now that we have what are called null mouse or knockout mice, how do we target and understand and come up with a rigorous way of fully describing what's going on here? What's the treatment opportunity that avails itself with these animal models, and understanding that there could be an infusion or an injection of these factors, these anti-mineralization factors that could potentially not only stall the disease process, but actually mitigate or reverse some of the symptoms. So we're potentially looking at an intervention on a condition that was previously presumed to be intractable, that once tissue damage or mineralization had taken place, then the damage was done. There's nothing else we could do. But potentially now, with our early experiments, there's even indication that we can reverse some aspects of the disease. So that is certainly very exciting. This diagram is just too complex to see on a slide, but ultimately this is the metabolic pathway in humans. So here we go again. We're talking about a complex gene, a complex protein, and a complex organ that has complex interactions in the circulatory system that relates to this complex map of human metabolism. So this is a real systems challenge, a real data challenge, and this is a cautionary tale that we have to be very careful when initially the hypothesis about vitamin K or magnesium sounds really exciting, and individuals go run off and want to take and eat lots of kale or take in vitamin K or up their dose of magnesium. There's lots of other things going on here, and it will probably never be as simple as, well, we all need to just up our dose of this vitamin or that vitamin to stave off the disease process. So there's still a lot of important work that needs to take place. And this, I just wanted to highlight that there's lots of aspects that we don't understand the metabolic pathway, and then when you disturb this or change some of this diagram due to a disease like PXE, there's all kinds of interactions and dynamics that we can't conceive of yet that we still need to investigate. And the basic science and the clinical work will certainly advance, and this knowledge will take place, and this knowledge generation will work hard to support. But obviously we want to focus on alleviating the burden of disease and helping patients as soon as possible. So this fine balance of supporting good research and working with the research community and really trying to drive and get forward to results that are evidence-based and fact-driven, so we can deliver that to the patient community as quickly as possible. So the next few slides I'll just go through really quickly because I want to leave time for questions. But here's a picture of the zebrafish and the mouse models. We have ongoing research in certainly metabolism and liver function. We have a clinical diagnostic test that is available. There are drug therapy screening activities taking place. And coming out of the November research meeting, this has picked up its pace as well. There's the drug research. So is there an enzyme or a natural compound which can be used for anti-mineralization, and if so, how do we design a drug at a pharmaceutical grade and introduce it to mice and see if we can reverse the disease in the mice with certain drugs? Are there actually, there's a whole list here of active questions that are taking place that research groups are looking at, from the liver function to the tissue-based activity of this gene, to understand extreme and intermediate phenotypes, and understanding complex families that have a variety of diseases and not just PXE, understanding these correlations, and moving forward to have a rational approach for disease interventions. So there's research groups and research activities at PXE International supporting for all of those. Recurrent projects, we're coming out of November. We're looking at validating a functional assay to screen natural compounds and drugs and other small molecules that potentially could be treatments for PXE. We're looking at this complex nature of genomic function, which I described earlier. We're looking at additional genes and characterizing additional genes associated with PXE. The database I talked about is important for researchers around the world to actually go to and have a resource. We have the animal models, the fish, the zebrafish is being worked up and clinically understood much better than it has been. We have active research efforts to actually transplant a liver, so a healthy mouse liver, actually get microsurgery to transplant a mouse and fully demonstrate that the liver itself is the organ of interest for PXE, as well as potentially even transplanting kidneys to understand the kidney's role in these animals. So it's a pretty phenomenal microsurgery. We have the 2 intervention trials. One of them I talked about is this magnesium study. The other is at the NIH looking at the use of Avastin and Lucentis, which are 2 compounds for the eye bleeds and the eye treatments, and certainly that's helped a lot of individuals stave off vision loss. And we have exploratory research. Certainly, as I mentioned, there's this complex interaction between vitamin K, magnesium, phosphate, calcium. So a lot of basic PXE work is being done to understand the interactions of these various minerals and vitamins and to just be able to describe its activity in the animal and in humans and understand absorption and transport in its influence on tissues, and this metabolic cycle understand more completely. So PXE International is actually forming quite an array of various science in various organ systems and metabolism understanding that's unique to PXE but helps inform wellness and just regular biological understanding. So with that, I've kind of quickly run through everything PXE International is doing, and I'll stop there and let Christine open up the phone lines or the questions, and I'll be more than willing to answer anything that you can throw at me.
Thanks very much, Pat. That was extremely thick and interesting. One question came up early on, and that is, do you know of any relationship between PXE and kidney cancer, since there's some expression in the kidney? And this person says especially when there's no family history at all of kidney cancer, but a child with PXE gets it.
Yeah, there's no indication that PXE is associated with any form of cancer, and actually quite the opposite it may be true. It is believed that perhaps in lower forms of life, and maybe even in plant life, actually having the loss of function of this gene prevented radiation damage and cancer or DNA alteration and cancer from forming. But there's nothing in the literature that supports any hypothesis that PXE patients are more amenable to cancer or certain types of cancer. So the challenges with PXE and having such a diverse community of individuals that end up getting PXE is obviously that we're all prone to other diseases of various sorts. So the current hypothesis, it's not even a hypothesis, it's more of a guess, that the research community and the genetic community think that each of us are walking around with maybe 40 or 60 genetic alterations that predispose us to various forms of disease. And these can be just random events, these could just be individual spelling errors in an important gene that predispose us to gout, or vitamin D deficiency, or other conditions, cardiovascular disease. So just by random event, PXE individuals could have conditions that are just normally occurring in the general population and are not associated with PXE. And to my knowledge, there's been no linking at all with liver cancer or kidney cancer, even though this gene primarily operates in those organs, that causes any other damage to the organ or produces cancer of any sort.
Thank you. There's a question whether you perceive there was a general theme or research consensus at the November research meeting that just happened.
Yeah, and it was the reason I was excited was there were some consensus that was arrived at. So you have researchers that got involved with PXE for a certain aspect of it that they have expertise in. Sorry about that, I've got a phone call in the background. And they have a hypothesis and they're not experts in some of what they're trying to advance. And in the PXE research meeting, we brought some vitamin K experts in that changed the minds of some of the researchers, because they all thought they had negative results with PXE and vitamin K, and this researcher made some observations that made them return back to their data, reanalyze some of their analysis, and perhaps come to different conclusions in different experiments. So that's why the vitamin K research turned out to be pretty disappointing. But out of the research meeting, there are other things to look at and understand. So that research isn't quite done and resolved yet. So the challenge with science is that it's all iterative, and it needs to be experiments done, conclusions made, and someone advances an hypothesis that others try to replicate or reproduce, and all of that takes time, and people get different results and confounding results, and then you need to come together and kind of argue and debate what these results actually mean. So the process can be pretty messy, but it really is how we advance the disease research. And you know, some of the challenge, what I highlighted there, we have this metabolic syndrome hypothesis that the data seems really profoundly supportive of. And then Yvonne Ronchetti's group out of Italy have again and again demonstrated that the cellular behavior is altered in these various tissues due to PXE, and the community has to grapple with that knowledge as well. So we can't just say it's a metabolic disease, that it's much more complicated than that. So that was another conclusion. Certainly science loves to come to an answer, a resolution, and say, okay, this is what it is, and we move forward, done. You know, what are the next series of experiments that need to happen? So out of the research meeting, the consensus was this is a metabolic disorder. It also has localization and cellular specific or tissue specific ramifications that need to be understood as well. That vitamin K and magnesium are part of a complex picture of metabolism that needs to be further understood. There's probably not a magic bullet here. There's probably a complex balance that needs to be struck, so we need to understand what these factors are circulating, how they relate to organs and cells of various types in the body, and how we can certainly focus on the most severe aspects of the PXE and not necessarily worry about all organ systems and all tissues and all cell types, but certain cells, and is there a way you could reverse some of the damage to the elastin membrane in the eye, for instance, and can that be a target organs to prevent any angioid streaks and macular bleeds and some of the vision complications associated with PXE. So there's so certainly some target activities. Lots of kidney work will be taking place, and the drug development activities. There was lots of consensus about doing things in parallel, even on imperfect information, if we can further work on drug development, clinical studies, as well as the basic animal models with the cellular systems and the zebrafish and the mouse, kind of all the way back to the PXE International research agenda of saying let's work on all of these things that are important, they're informative, and let's try to collectively keep an open dialogue, an open mind, and move the research enterprise forward.
Thank you. What about stem cell research in anywhere in the world? Do you have any comments on stem cells for treating macular degeneration or other conditions, and also potentially PXE? And I can add a little bit onto that. Father, who's a member of PXE International, a father of a son with PXE, was approached by a fetal stem cell company saying, yes, fetal stem cell injections can definitely help your son, and he asked us about that. What evidence is there?
Yeah, and a lot of there's certainly lots of hope and promise associated with what's called regenerative medicine. So certainly the body has the potential with these stem cells to repair and to renew various aspects of the body. Certainly the liver is probably one of the most profoundly capable regenerative organ in our bodies. So there's all kinds of harm that can be done to the liver and it regenerates itself. So it's a tremendous opportunity. But the stem cell research is basically very nascent and just at the beginning stages, and there's certainly been a lot of work in animal models associated with stem cell therapy, and some of the challenges have been surmounted about how do you extract stem cells, how can you deliver stem cells. So those hurdles, technical hurdles, have been leapt over, but the challenges are associated with its lasting effect, its therapeutic impact. So even though you can extract stem cells, multiply and reproduce stem cells, and return them back into the effective organ, the challenge is sometimes those stem cells don't do what they're supposed to do, and there's no long-lasting effect or therapeutic consequence. So there's lots of work that still needs to be done. And it's probably literally decades away. So this science is very new, very exciting, quite possible that you could repair certain tissues within the body with stem cells, but it's still quite a long ways off. There are a number of diseases and immune diseases and other conditions that there are human clinical studies underway to show that stem cell therapy could have an impact. But all of the challenges associated with spinal cord repair with stem cells and those types of things have been hyped and promoted, and stem cells for macular degeneration have been hyped and promoted. But again, this is early days, and also some of what's emerged is there could potentially be lots of unknown side effects associated with these types of therapies that could introduce cancer and other complications. So it's not a magic bullet at this stage. It's certainly something we're watching. There's literally tens of millions of dollars being spent in understanding stem cell therapy for macular degeneration, not necessarily for PXE, but that type of research that we pay attention to and we watch, and if there are opportunities and the science is good, we'll certainly incorporate it into our research agenda. But at this point, it's still too early for us to do anything. We are scoping now some stem cell hypotheses with some NIH grants as part of a rare disease initiative to say, could a number of rare diseases get together and look at, does stem cell therapy avail itself to a therapeutic approach for certain diseases, but we'll see where that goes. It's still literally years away, I think, before we've can fully appreciate what the opportunity is with stem cell therapy.
Thank you. Sounds like a complicated topic. One person would like to know what is the best way for the PXE community of patients, affected individuals and their families, what's the best way for them to assist in fast-tracking this research?
Well, I think getting involved and supportive of the foundation, and it doesn't necessarily always mean money and donations, but it's just time, contribution, organization. There's a variety of things that the foundation needs to do. So on top of this research activity, there's also all of the patient support, making sure that clinicians know that the foundation exists, what PXE is, reaching out to dermatologists and retinologists in your area for educational campaigns, finding other patients around that need support, need to know that they're not alone. So there's various aspects of kind of the psychosocial support of individuals with PXE and their families and their extended families in communities around the world. So helping organize a support network is very important and always ongoing, and it always can be improved, and gaining new enthusiasm and new individuals into the PXE family are really important for us in the foundation. It's our lifeblood, it's our momentum. Fundraising certainly is an important aspect, because all of what we do, we bring in a substantial amount of funds. We have very little overhead, and we turn that around in a very focused and disciplined executionary fashion to support research and to move the ball forward. So, there's been fundraisers done of all sorts, of collecting pennies to doing car washes to doing golf tournaments to going to and soliciting grants. So there's if you're a professional in a certain area and you can deliver in-kind services, I mean, it really is across the board what you can do. And certainly getting involved and joining the listserv and having an opportunity to come to the international PXE meetings and meeting other patients and getting connected, that's certainly the most important first step.
And I'd like to add that there is one kind of donation of your clinical information that we're collecting anytime you are available to give it. It takes some time. It's a fairly long questionnaire, but it's online, and you donate to us information about your PXE or your child's. If your children are young, you can do that for your child. And if you're interested in doing that, you can look up the clinical questionnaire on our website and request that we send you the username and password. And that's another ongoing study that I think Patrick also mentioned.
Yeah, and that's thanks, Christine, because that's really important, because we're one of the only rare diseases that has collected epidemiological medical records and reassessed the patient population over these 15 years. So we are basically building the foundation of being able to describe what is PXE, how does it progress. So when we have a therapeutic intervention for this disease, we'll easily be able to have a biomarker, understand a therapeutic influence and consequence, so we could get something approved by the regulatory agencies, get it reimbursed by health authorities. So that contribution to that epidemiological and clinical study is really phenomenally important.
And having it online and in the repository where we're keeping it now, we are able to collect your information through time, which gives us important information on how PXE progresses. And when we first did the epidemiological survey, it was a one moment in time, and we didn't have how PXE progresses in different individuals. That's an important addition now that we're able to collect. And it'll be important when we want to test a drug treatment. Do you have any information, Pat, on whether Avastin or Lucentis so far has proven more effective in PXE?
They've both proven effective. We're working with the NIH on a controlled study to understand they're different compounds, but ultimately they're having the same profound effect in reversing a bleed with PXE patients. The challenge with both of these drugs is Lucentis is the drug that's approved for eye disease, and it's extremely expensive. And some clinicians and others have been using Avastin, which is a colon cancer drug. But both of these drugs work against killing or eliminating new blood vessels. So cancer produces blood vessels to support the tumor. In macular degeneration, you have these very fragile vessels that bleed and cause vision loss. And there are circumstances in which we have data from patients that have used Avastin with great effect and used Lucentis with great effect. And we're working now to see if we can create enough data so we can get these therapies approved for PXE and get them reimbursed by insurers and allow clinicians to have all the information they need to be able to use these therapies on PXE patients, and having medical necessity letters and other support for patients and clinicians to make sure patients have access to these therapies. So having a retinologist and having all of this in place for you and your loved ones is important. Using an Amsler grid to understand when you're having some vision distortion and getting immediately to a retinologist and a specialist, and knowing that these therapies exist. Patients that have vision distortion or vision loss have rescued their vision with these therapies, so it's certainly in the last 2 or 3 years has been a dramatic advance for the PXE community and for patients struggling with this aspect of PXE.
And there's another question from someone who attended our patient meeting in the fall, and there was someone they're recruiting for the magnesium clinical trial. She was Rita Patel, a research associate with Dr. Lovewell. And this person's wondering if you have any update on the timeline. I know you talked about that a little already.
Yeah, so we're still waiting on the FDA, which is the official regulatory body that needs to approve an investigational new drug study. So this is a formal application. The FDA has given a negative response to the original design and asked for amendments, and those amendments were done and revised and resubmitted. So once the FDA has cleared this study, and we'll put it under a IRB review and an ethics review panel, and PXE International and these investigators from New York will announce this trial and announce the criteria for enrollment and help individuals that are interested to participate. So that announcement will be made. Timeline is it'll happen this year, but to be more specific right now, it would only be a guess. So there's lots of regulatory and institutional things that need to be executed first, and we're not in control of that timeline or that process. So once all of the bureaucracy and the logistics are completed, we'll announce to the community and let them know what's happening, when it's happening, and where it's happening.
And I wanted to add that I believe it's Sharon Terry is one of the investigators on that trial. So PXE International is intimately involved, and we'll let you know the second we know, and that you can start signing up.
Yeah.
And then we have a question about if you know where the most densely the most dense population of PXEers is in the United States. And just before you start, if you have any information on that, our website does have a page that is called Where in the World Are PXEers, and we plot all our PXEers who are registered with us on a Google map, and Google can show you where there's some density. But Pat, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, when we started the foundation in Massachusetts, the highest density of PXE were in Rhode Island. It's a tiny state that we had tremendous early PXE involvement with patients and clinicians, and we could identify PXEers. They seemed like every other person had PXE, but in reality, again, this is the affected status is probably 1 in 50,000. So you can go to any population map and Google Maps and understand that a certain percentage of these individuals have PXE, and oftentimes, as we all know, this can be misdiagnosed, or you could have mild symptoms, or you could only have eye lesions, and individuals are being diagnosed with macular degeneration when actually they have PXE. So there is no massive concentration of PXEers outside of South Africa, because they have what's called a founder population, and there literally you had Dutch from the 1800s who had PXE, landed in South Africa, intermingled with the population and grew, and then there was a huge diaspora and human migration in South Africa that concentrated a certain Dutch population of Afrikaners who ended up obviously intermarrying and having a high concentration of pseudoxanthoma elasticum. But other than that, there is no huge concentration of PXEers in the United States. There's small villages in Italy, remote mountain villages that have a high density of PXE, those types of things. But every ethnic group and every population in the world has a certain density of PXE.
And I think a couple places we don't get a lot of data from for our map, our particular map and membership, is places like India, where there's a huge population of people who aren't connected to the internet, and also China. We don't have very many people at all, and the same problem there. But I think we're going to be making some inroads in China.
Yes, so there are some researchers that obviously have some PXE patients and realize that it's the incidence is probably the same in China and in India, but because of the nature of those economies and the digital divide and not having access to the internet and so forth, those patients can be hard to find, and but we're making some progress, and there's some research activities that will begin this year, some collaborations with the Chinese research community as well as the Chinese government, so that will be interesting to see how that progresses.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for your time. I have one last question here about doctors who specialize in PXE, and I'll just tell you our general answer is there are very few. One of them is in Rhode Island, and that's our medical director. It's usually, because PXE is a rare disease and there are so many rare diseases, it's up to you to educate your doctor about PXE, and it's not hard. Our medical director did write a bulletin for doctors, and you can get that on our website, or I can send it to you. And you just need to find a physician who is willing to listen and willing to learn, and sometimes that is a challenge. But do you have anything to add to that, Pat?
No, I would just build off that, Christine, and just say that you need to find physicians that you're comfortable with, that you really like, that you have access to, and build a relationship, because the knowledge now around what PXE is, how to manage it, all of that is accessible, and there are physician peer-to-peer support for your clinician. If they're not an expert, they don't need to be an expert, but they can, if they're, as Chris said, if they're willing to learn, there's enough material to support them, and having a go-to retinologist and understanding how to manage any complications, that if you have a family history of a certain complication, making sure your physician knows that, and just being prepared for all aspects of good care. And it really is, sorry to say, up to you to find those physicians that are willing to work with you, because there are 6,000 rare diseases, and clinicians can't be a specialist in all of them, but if they're willing to work with you, then build that network for yourself.
Yeah, you have to be your own advocate.
Yes.
And then one last question looking forward. Where do you see the development of information and knowledge on PXE to be in the next 10 years?
Ooh, the next 10 years. I thought I was working on PXE. I certainly got involved because of my children, but I quickly rationalized that this was for future generations, that because science progresses so methodically that we probably wouldn't have an impact on the disease manifestations of my children. But as we've seen in the last 3 years now, with the availability of treatments for the vision loss associated with PXE, that the managing of symptoms for PXE and the management of the complications of disease, the slow progressing disease, which is PXE, I believe that in the next decade we will have a disease interference, and we will avoid some of the most dramatic consequences of PXE, and PXE individuals will be worrying about what the rest of the healthy population worries about, is how to live long and healthy and optimal lives. So I'm fully confident in the next decade we will make significant progress in the challenges associated with pseudoxanthoma elasticum. So I'm quite enthused, and I'm certainly anxious to find a solution and turn out the lights for the PXE Foundation, because people can move on and just worry about their day-to-day lives and not PXE.
That sounds very hopeful. And thank you very much, Pat, for being with us today and sharing all this new and exciting information. I would like to point out on the final slide here that if you have any other questions that come up, you can send them to info@pxe.org, or you can leave a message at the office, and the phone number is there on the screen. We have a webinar coming up in March. We don't have the date yet, and that is Women's Health Issues in PXE, and that will be our medical director, Dr. Lionel Berkovich, presenting that. And we'll send out an announcement as soon as we have a date fixed. And we also have registration for the webinars on our website. You can go register there when we have the date set up and the webinar set up. And again, Patrick, thank you very much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today.
Well, thanks for everybody for being on, and look forward to meeting people face-to-face someday.